Welcome to The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. The Lens is a business in the community podcast in partnership with One Young World. Well, our guests today, I'm delighted to introduce Ben Pritchard, CEO of AVK, a leading provider of innovative power solutions for data centres and major organisations. And joining Ben, we welcome Harshit Poddar, who is co-founder of SAFEARTH, which is a platform designed to simplify and optimise the solar adoption process. In this episode, we're discussing environmental sustainability, and we'll be talking about how data can make a sustainable world go round. So let's get into the conversation now. Ben, Harshit, delighted to have you on The Lens today to help our listeners really understand the power of data, but then also the scale of the issues facing the planet in an energy consuming world. So sometimes that is a little bit of a disconnect there. Please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you've come to be in your role at AVK. I believe it's a family story there. But can you give us an easy definition also of a data center? And if you want to tell us a little bit about what you do when you're not working as well.
Great, thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm Ben Pritchard, CEO of AVK. I've been at AVK for 13 years, held a number of roles within the business, started as a sort of service engineer, going out and fixing engines at that time, then commissioning and sort of worked all my way through. AVK's been on a pretty interesting journey as it hasn't always been in data. Data centers are fairly new, not just to the public, but in the scale that they are now, they're fairly new in design. We would have typically done a lot of critical facilities like hospitals, banks, and areas like that. Only probably over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, we've really seen the data market step up a gear. What's a data center? I suppose simplistically, almost a powered shed or warehouse that is housing your data and all of the data that goes on your phone or anything that society uses will go through these various areas. A little bit about myself. When I'm not working, you normally find me sailing on a boat, racing some boats is sort of my passion.
Well, Ben, I'm sure there are lots of growth opportunities with AI and with cloud and with data centers and all of that, but that comes with the environmental challenge too. So hold those thoughts and we'll come back to you. Harshit, where are you joining us from? And tell us a little bit about you. You are the co-founder of SAFEARTH. So you're going to tell us a bit more about that, but it's really about solar power.
Hi, Sarah. Firstly, thank you for having me here. So today I join in from India. In fact, I'm in New Delhi at the moment. So I started working in renewable energy right out of college. In fact, right in college. Back then I was in my second year of engineering and I discovered renewable energy financing. And to me, it just seemed like something too good to be true. I mean, you're telling me that you would install a solar plant on my roof. I wouldn't pay for it and you'd essentially just sell me cheaper power. I mean, to me, that seemed like something that's going to solve multiple problems. I started working in renewables about 10 years back. My first solar plant was for engineering college when I was all but 21 years old. And since then, I've been essentially on a mission to decarbonize the industries of the world. One of the things that we saw was that the largest contributors to climate action was essentially manufacturing and industrial operations, right? And the largest contributor to industrial emissions was energy. So solving industrial energy requirements and shifting that to sustainable energy is probably the biggest differentiator that we can create in the fight against climate change. After working in the space for a couple of years, my co-founders and I realized that everyone who's buying a renewable energy plant in the 21st century has never bought one before. An average user does not have any past experience. And despite the fact that it ticked all boxes and made a lot of sense, 90% of people who were considering buying a solar plant simply did not end up buying one. So we realized there was a fundamental flaw with the ecosystem, with the industry. And to solve that, we started SAFE. SAFEARTH has built a platform that digitizes the entire transition from conceptualization to operating a renewable energy asset. We have built tools that help in streamlining the entire process.
And in terms of the bottom line and those conversions, are you finding that people are coming to you and you're making the whole process easier? Are they converting?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, SAFEARTH has today deployed about 500 megawatt of distributed solar projects. That's saving an annual about 800,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year. We've got a conversion rate of about 67%. So 2 out of 3 qualified industries on our platform actually end up purchasing a solar plant.
Absolutely incredible. And I'm correct to say that you were brought up in the Himalayas, so you were
Oh,
absolutely in
yes.
touch with nature there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I went to a boarding school in the Himalayas, and that was a really formative years for me. That's where my love for the climate really started. I've ever since wanted to do something in climate action.
Okay, well, we'll hear more from you. And let's go back to Ben and those data centers. Data centers contribute a great share of carbon emissions that we don't want right now. Can you share, Ben, now how you think there can be a balance between this hunger, this need for data, the storage of that data, and then reducing the environmental impacts that we've just heard Harshit talk about?
So it's really interesting. Data's been in our lives for so long, but yet we're only just now understanding in terms of the consumers about data centers and how their data is sort of used and stored, etc. And I firstly believe that data and net zero targets, they're not mutually exclusive. I think when you look at a data center and the power consumption that a data center is actually using, and you look at some of the work that we're trying to do with renewables in terms of putting renewables on systems, actually they can go hand in hand. You know, you can have large scale power that's deployed for data centers actually being made available to work in tandem with things like solar or wind. Now that's all running on HVO, which is hydrogenated vegetable oil. So the industry is making these steps, but it doesn't move as quick as one would need. And we're sort of at the point where society needs data and data needs power. I suppose the big question is how do we work and how do we solve that? We need direct renewables, but we also need something spinning. Let's say a generator, it's a reciprocating engine, it's a turbine or something like that, being able to underpin those renewable sources at large scale to ensure that the grid is stable. Then we add the question of, well, what's it going to be fueled from? You have to solve it in stages. You know, you've got the technology now that's available. You don't necessarily have the fuel that's available now, but we see things like hydrogen, we see bioethanol, we see biomethane, we see all these fuels that are starting to come on board. And the data center industry can be first adopters of that and really help drive to a significant difference in the way energy is actually seen, used, and consumed.
Many of our listeners, they're responsible businesses. The environment's really important to them, but they're certainly not going to get left behind when it comes to data, or they're going to be out of business. So I suppose, what's your message to them now in sort of trust in the process, trust that we'll get there, trust that we won't destroy the planet now that everyone's using AI?
I would say it's a bit more deeper than just trust. I would say continue to ask difficult questions and hold the data center industry accountable. That's what we should do. But I think it's on the data center sector to actually educate and bring people on the journey, being sort of the leaders of data center developers, people like myself as well, being able to be on platforms like this and help shine a bit of a light on how it can be. And it's definitely how it can be, not how it is right now. We're working towards, and you see developers that are taking huge steps to ensure that they are sustainable and really running at that journey. And I think they're the companies that we need to hold up and celebrate and ensure that that's the new standard. There's not many moments in history where you see such pivotal changes that technology or infrastructure or both change society in such a way that it will be unrecognizable. And this is one of those areas. And I think that's where it takes everyone involved in that to be responsible and cognizant of the fact there is a future, and we need to make sure that we're sort of building with that in mind.
There's often that comparison made, when it comes to carbon emissions, that comparison is made between data centers and aviation. And, the stark reality that actually these data centers, they're producing more carbon emissions currently. Just explain to people the energy that goes into data centers. Go back to basics for us. What is it used for?
Yeah, so it's used for running the servers essentially. But I suppose a data center probably 10 years ago was 15 megawatts. Now data centers are 100 megawatts because that's the requirement. So that's where that demand comes from. But it's used for running your servers, cooling, and all the plant around that.
Do you think it's good for us all to be having these conversations now? What, are people coming to you? Are they asking those probing questions?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my life at the moment is talking around how we can build off-grid generation initially to stop data centers being a strain on the grid and being a focus, but then how can we change that facility into something that actually gives back into the infrastructure and supports that renewable effort once the grid infrastructure is there and you're able to connect it.
Ben, I have so many questions for you. I will just start with one for now. First and foremost, today, if a data center was to power itself with, let's say, 100% renewables. Now we're talking about, adding wind, solar, some batteries to store the extra energy produced. What would be the approximate increase in the capex of that data center? I'm trying to see the economics of, powering a data center with renewables as on today. And the second thing that I'd love to know is what are some of these energy sources that you in this business are really excited to see it grow? What are some of the potential base energy sources that you think could actually power the data centers of the future?
Yeah, so there's some data centers at the moment that are almost fully renewable. You see areas such in the Nordics where they have significant amount of hydro available and they have that infrastructure there. So data centers, there's not one design fits all. So there definitely are areas where there's significant amount of offshore wind, for example, where it's available and it makes sense to plug straight in. I don't know whether building wind specifically for data centers and then backup and then is something that would probably be that feasible as well, just because of also the limitations of where you can build data centers. There are sites now within Europe that are running for fully renewable. I probably am not best to talk around the capex of building a data center as such. In terms of the future tech, so you have to answer the technology need now, which actually I think is traditional technology that is running on future fuels. I think that's what I get most excited about is the future fuels piece. And that's the bit where we're seeing loads of development in technology that's been running for the last 20, 30 years. So we know it's reliable. We know that it's going to be a sort of positive impact in the market straight away. The sort of future tech, I suppose, we see a lot about SMRs in the news and obviously hydrogen as well. We'll probably put hydrogen in a similar bank to SMRs. SMRs are small modular reactors. So they're small nuclear reactors that you'd find in a submarine, essentially. They are longer term plays that are very exciting. There's quite a long journey that I see in order to get there, but I think that's something that is super exciting. And we also look at technology. We're seeing engines now running on 70% water, 30% bioethanol. We're seeing combustion engines run on that as we speak, and I think that's where, to Sarah's point around the comparison between aviation and data centers, I actually think that's really positive because there's a lot of lessons learned there. Everyone's under a similar sort of microscope, and we're seeing that fuels that potentially used in aviation can be used in data centers, and similar data centers are now driving that question as well. So yeah, I would say long term it's definitely SMRs. Short term, I would say it's not necessarily technology, it's more the fuel.
Harshit, were you hoping for a solar energy solution there? You were hoping that Ben would check out SAFEARTH?
No, actually, I actually completely agree with Ben that it really depends on the region of the world where you're talking about. For example, in the UK, a solar energy power data center probably cannot possibly be built. There's just so many better options. And that's the core thing about renewables, right? It really depends on which part of the world you are in.
It's a huge effort that the data center market needs to go under to understand how best can they support that energy transition. And I think that they do speed it up because they actually make it viable to build a significant solar plant because they are huge off takers, whereas before that solar plant may not have been a viable piece.
And then when it comes to recruitment, how much of that recruitment is around recruiting the types of brains like Harshit there, those problem solvers, those thinkers that will come up with those solutions?
It's everything. Engineering and delivery is probably the area where there's the biggest sort of skills gap. It's been quite a journey for us to grow the business in a way. We've introduced our own internal pieces like the AVK Academy, where we're trying to get entry-level people into data centers and understand how to fix an engine and then step through and become commissioning engineers, for example. And similarly, giving pathways to graduates to be graduate engineers and PMs. And I think the data center market is quite a small market. So we're now having to look outside of that pool, which I think is great. We're bringing great minds that maybe don't understand what a data center is, but they understand energy and power and just the different way of thinking unlocks so much in terms of AVK's potential, because you're right, we didn't really think about it like that because we've never seen that before. So you take someone from a process engineering background or something like that, and you get these really, really interesting sort of solutions that get thrown up.
Now, Harshit, you were very young when you discovered the transformative potential of solar energy. But what advice would you give to other young people who want to do something better, to change the world for better?
Well, firstly, I think this is probably the best time to be alive, the best time to be a young person trying to figure out their place in the world, because the access to knowledge has now been easier, right? But then that brings in the opportunity, right? Today, the first thing that I tell everyone on my team and that I very strongly advocate for is the key skill today is to learn how to learn. To be constantly learning and to be flexible enough to learn is the number one thing that everybody, irrespective of their age, needs to cultivate in today. And number two, just go do it. If you're thinking about, trying to solve a climate tech problem or a climate related problem particularly, you'll probably be able to find a why not to do it. But that one reason of why to do it, which has to be done, is probably the single biggest reason to go ahead and do it. So I very profoundly believe that the climate tech is probably the best way to create a differentiator in the world, to create an impact in the world today, just because of the scale of this problem. And it requires every mind out there. So be open to learning and just go do it.
I love that advice about understanding how to learn. Would you agree, Ben?
Yeah, for sure. I think I would say being exposed to a market that's ever changing, you go on this journey, don't you? And the successful people end up just being able to adapt and learn. And I think that renewable piece is so new and there's so much opportunity to learn. And even you see solar specific, you see just how the technology is changing just in the last 3 to 5 years, and battery technology as well. The opportunity to learn is just so amazing. And when you think about energy as a whole, for sure.
Gosh, where will we be in 10 years' time, I wonder? Do you have any questions for Harshit, Ben?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to understand, Harshit, what you see solar's role in that sort of global decarbonisation and what role it takes, I suppose.
So Ben, you're firstly absolutely right. The last couple of years in solar has been very transformative. We were talking about average modules being about 24-25% efficient versus them being about 16% efficient just about 5 years back. So that's literally about a 50% increase. But at the same time, the fundamental problem with solar has always been that the sun will only shine during the day. You will not be able to produce the energy during the night. So because of this, you're essentially not able for it to be a primary source of power. However, that is about to change. First and foremost, with batteries now becoming central theme, the cost of batteries have fallen down beyond a viable point. Today, it is cheaper to store that power and then use that in the night versus power that you could get from a thermal power plant. We're about to now start seeing larger and larger solar projects along with batteries come out there. We're beginning to see that in India, in China, in countries where you have abundant sunshine and you've got extremely low cost of solar energy. So with this power now being viable to store this power can now be used 24/7. At the same time, the grid around the world is becoming a lot smarter. We're already seeing a lot of load shaving happening, wherein power consumption is moving towards times of peak power production. And these two trends, I believe, will now make not just solar, but solar, wind, any form of variable renewable power generation, it will make it much more viable and much more mainstream. That being said, there will always be a requirement for a base power generation that has been coming from thermal power plants of the past, but in the future could potentially be coming in from SMRs, could potentially be coming in from hydrogen generation. We're seeing a huge shift wherein renewables are now going to become a lot more mainstream. They've already become a lot more mainstream than what they were just 5 years back. But you're right, we're at that inflection point wherein they can actually become the primary source of power around the world.
So I suppose that underpins our thinking as well. We're not necessarily fully exposed as AVK to people like yourself with who are involved directly in solar or wind, but we see renewables, them being the main act, the rest of these sort of base load areas being the supporting act. Last one for me, just on the battery technology. We have some exposure to batteries in terms of when we build a microgrid, we would have some batteries that are supporting that small grid. Well, one question that we see around battery technology, and it's in some cases solar, although we're not directly involved, how you deal with that end of life piece, especially with the batteries. It'd be great to sort of understand your sort of view of that, because that's a question that we would be asked quite a bit.
Wonderful question. 10 years ago, e-waste was a huge problem. And today, e-waste is a huge opportunity. Similarly, when it comes to batteries, when it comes to solar panels, India alone is going to be producing about 18 million tons of solar waste 2035. In terms of battery, that number is even higher. I believe we would be able to recycle it. In fact, up to 99% of all the critical raw materials of batteries can be recovered today. The problem here is a reverse logistics problem, which is where I believe at the time of deployment of a battery or of a renewable energy plant, developers and adopters need to be a little smart about how they deploy them so that they can be then recycled at their end of life. If you see today, what is happening is that essentially batteries after 5, 7, 8 years, they're being refurbished for a second use or they're being recycled. The technology is there. It's about building the reverse logistic network so that can be done effectively. And I believe that's an easier to solve problem than the core problems that we're trying to solve with these technologies.
Harshit, you're a font of knowledge, absolutely, and loads of really interesting points there, Ben. I'm sure you would agree that, that point where greener becomes cheaper, that is ultimately what business is about as well. Harshit, did you have another question for Ben?
Oh, yes. Currently, today, about 2% of the total energy in the world is being consumed in data centers, right? And this is going to grow phenomenally. I've been reading a lot around this, and the estimates that I've seen are very, very staggering, like right from like 20% to up to 99%. It's going to be a phenomenal energy consumption growth. Firstly, while meeting that power requirement with renewables is one facet of it, one of the key aspects is also reduction of energy consumption in a data center. Please tell us a little about the work that's happening. I see a lot of interesting work happening around cooling, around servers. Would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I suppose the big thing that's driving that growth is the server growth. So we've seen servers grow from maybe 4 kilowatt racks to up to 120 kilowatt racks now. That starts to bring about the cooling, and that's where the challenges around cooling. So we're seeing some pretty neat designs around liquid to liquid cooling that's trying to drive efficiencies. I suppose we operate probably a little bit outside of that white space opportunity for me in terms of if we build a microgrid and we have a significant amount of waste heat, for example, is one area. How do we drive efficiencies there? So if you might have remembered the Paris Olympic swimming pool that was heated from a data center. Actually, data centers with the power and with being able to utilize some of the offtakes from that and do it in a structured manner is a huge win for the efficiencies. We've seen the sort of US lead the way in data and deployment of large-scale data centers. Europe's a little bit more difficult because it's regionalized. There's not vast spaces of land and it's very different climates. So there's probably a bit more thinking to do about deployment of AI strategies. The growth that we read about and hear about isn't yet, in my head, quantifiable. You could ask probably 10 or 20 different people within the data center sector and they'd all have a different view. The big thing for me around efficiency wise is that use of excess. How do we make that sort of dispatchable power as efficient as possible? It's not groundbreaking technology. It's technology and thinking that's been around for a long time. It's just applying it on a pretty large scale, being able to find the off-takers for that sort of area.
Gosh, this is such a fascinating, but as I say, intimidating subject. I'd love to invite you both back now in 10 years' time and just see what has actually happened. What happened next? Yeah, we'll definitely revisit. But before we leave you today, we're building up a little bit of, I suppose, a book club or advice for our listeners. What would you recommend to inspire them? So Ben, if I could start with you, anything that you would recommend to read or listen or piece of research or a report that I suppose would help people be more responsible, what would that be?
So not to shamelessly plug a report that's coming out from us, but there's a really useful report that really does dive into decarbonisation efforts of the global decarbonisation efforts and how data centres can be that hero or villain. And that, I mentioned it earlier, that inflection point. This is sort of the data that shows how with renewables, with reciprocating engines and turbines and future fuels, we can actually drive to a 2050 net zero target, with data centers playing a real role in that rollout. So that's something that I feel quite strongly about it, because I think it's a myth busting piece, and then the people that really like data will really enjoy that.
And then Harshit.
So a couple of books that I really recommend. So firstly, I really feel anybody wanting to really understand the scale of the climate problem and understand the status of it today should really go through the IPCC Summary. IPCC comes out with this annual summary that shares a lot of data from around the world, which really illuminates the problem. Apart from that, now talking a little in terms of the solution bit. So I firstly really love Bill Gates' book on how to avoid a climate disaster. I think it presents some really practical solutions and something that can help you in figuring out what are some of the things that you could work on. Additionally, anybody who's looking to build in the climate tech space, read 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel with the climate lens. I'm sure that would help you in building the best potential solutions in the space.
Well, we've got 3 there, though that'll be a lot of bedtime reading. Last question. We ask this to all of the guests. You're both responsible leaders, yeah? So as responsible leaders, what are you personally committed to doing more of or less of in the coming year? Ben?
So I would say more of trying to hold our own sector accountable and trying to lead the way. I think that's something that we pride ourselves on. And also trying to educate people, especially younger people, around data centers and the opportunity that they have in the market, and try and show them what a sort of fantastic space and sort of life-changing moment that we're at within the data center. And that's something that we're sort of launching our first sort of responsible business strategy. And that's at the core of it, is how do we give full transparency and show the journey? And also how do we get people fully engaged and understanding of data centers? Because it does worry me sometimes when I see some headlines around the data centers and the path that it may be treading. And I just really, I know that it doesn't need to be that way. So I suppose it's more transparency and encouraging the industry to come with us.
There are a lot of scary headlines out there, and I'm sure business in the community can help you with your responsible business journey. Harshit, what about you? What are you going to do more of or less of?
So for me, one of the things that I'm trying to change in my life is actually move away from single-use items. It's one small change that I feel that can have massive impact on my personal carbon footprint. In fact, Ben pointed out, one of the key problems with all of the renewables and batteries that we're deploying today is going to be the end of life. And it's really important to keep circularity in your mind as consumers, as businesses on day one, because unless you plan for it on day one, this will be a problem at its end of life. So definitely, more of circularity and less of single-use items.
It's simple, but it's effective. Thank you so much to Harshit and indeed to Ben, 2 fabulous guests as we discussed environmental sustainability and indeed data. You've been listening to The Lens with me, Sarah Travers. And if your business would like support with environmental sustainability, then please visit www.bitc.org.uk. Thank you, as always, for listening. Tune in next time.